Well, hello and welcome to the channel. My name's Johnny and you're watching Hillbilly Modeling. And this is going to be the beginning of a new project. This is part one of our Heinkel He162 A-2 Salamander, a single engine jet aircraft interceptor, which we're going to be building in this series. So if you haven't seen the kit review, check that out. You can find it on my YouTube page. So let's just go ahead and jump down and get started on this kit. Should be fun. So a quick look here at our instructions. And the first step, we'll start with number one. And that's going to be the assembly of the maintenance stand for the engine. So we're going to go ahead and assemble that. I don't know why it's the first step, but we're going to do that. So for you guys that are new to modeling, I'll just go ahead and tell you how I like to cut my parts off the sprue. I do leave these sprue gates, which is the little piece of polystyrene plastic that attaches the part to the sprue. I leave that on the part itself, and then I just cut it up next to the sprue. And the reason why I do that is because it's much easier to get a good clean cut without the sprue itself being in the way. So we're just going to cut off all the parts that we need. Now once we've got those parts cut off, we can get in really close and not nick the part, because we don't want to be cutting anything off that we're going to need later. And also you can see that I have a little cup there to hold all these little bitty parts. We don't need to be losing anything in the process. So we'll go ahead and cut all these sprue gates off. And as you can see, we can get in really close, especially on these tubular type parts, and nip that sprue gate right off of there, nice and clean. Now you are going to have just a little bit of the sprue gate left over, which needs to be cleaned up. And I'm just going to sand that off a little bit here. And just being really light, really careful, and that's a 400 grit stick that I'm using, a sanding stick, and we're just going to clean those off. Also, there is going to be a parting seam where the molds have left this real fine line where the parts were molded, and I'm just using the edge of my hobby knife, and we're just going to kind of slide that down that part and just clean that little seam up, that mold seam, and it'll get rid of it really quick for us. And we clean up this seam because we don't want that showing up in our paint later on. So next up, we're going to start attaching these casters, which are the wheels. They just have this little locator pin, goes straight into the hole, and I use a little bit of Tamiya extra thin to make sure that they stick into place. And I am adjusting mine so that they're all going in the same direction. Now you can adjust them and make them any way you want, but that's the way I'm going to do this. And then I'm going to come back in and touch a little bit of glue to where it passes through the top portion to securely hold it. And we're going to start with the front frame section, and it has these little half circle tabs. Yeah, that's it, tabs, that the center section is going to set on. And then the corners also have a hole and pin location. So I'm not doing too good with the tweezers, so we're just going to discard that so that I can get this set into place. I should have just used my fingers to begin with. And once we get it set, we'll need to come back in and make sure that the corners are setting right into that pin and hole location. So with that into place there, next up is the adjoining frame section. And it has little locator slots and tabs to go into, and yep, it's falling off. See, you're not the only one that drops stuff. Everybody drops it. So make sure that you're over top of your work surface and that things aren't falling on the floor. That would be bad. And okay, so I'm going to just go ahead and put this on off camera. I'm going to use a little bit of Tamiya Extra Thin to tack it into place. And then we're going to come back and make sure that right up underneath the mounting section here, where I've got my tweezers, that those pieces are joined correctly and they're nice and flush with one another, because we do have two mating sections there. Now once we get that set into place, we can go ahead and put a little bit of extra Tamiya Extra Thin there. Make sure we got plenty of glue on it, because these are really fragile small parts and we don't want it breaking loose on us later on. So with that done, we do have these left and right cross pieces that form the cradle section that's going to hold our engine into place. And they set onto a square tab, and just put a little bit of Tamiya Extra Thin there to hold them into place. Now once we get these glued up, the important thing is that they are parallel to one another, and that they are also parallel to the base of the engine stand itself. And hopefully I'm getting that correct. Otherwise our engine is not going to set like it is in the pictures. and we do want to try to replicate that as much as possible. And we do have a small handle that is going to go onto the front section here of our engine stand. And it has a little square locator slot for it and a little tab that goes into place. And there we go. So that should look really nice when we get it all painted up and detailed, weathered, a little bit chipping and stuff. Of course, that'll be in a future video. So now with step 1 out of the way, we're going to go ahead and work on step 2. This is going to be our cockpit area. So that's going to include our instrument cluster along with our rudder pedals. We also have our ejection seat, and we're going to put that together along with the actual wheel well and the support structure for our front nose wheel, and then the bulkhead for our ejection seat. So we're going to go ahead and take care of all that stuff. Now you can see here that the ejection seat is not supposed to be glued in. So I don't know how that's going to work out, but I guess we'll see. So we'll go ahead and start off with the main portion of our instrument cluster here. So I'm just going to put some self-clamping tweezers on it there. And I'll just put the Tamiya Extra Thin right on the contact area where our instrument cluster is going to go, and we'll set that into place and make sure that it's fully seated. So with it fully seated, we're going to readjust our holding tweezers. Now I want to draw your attention here to this little center spur that's in there. That's going to actually set the angle for our rudder pedals. And you can see right there we have a little cutout in that center bracket that's going to set that angle correctly for us. So we'll just go ahead and put a little bit of glue on it there, and then we'll set our rudder pedal and that mounting rod that they're attached to into place there. And we want to make sure that we're center and square, and that we have it pressed all the way up so that that angle is correct. And adding a little extra glue there to make sure that everything is well supported. So once this dries up, we won't be knocking it around. We just press it into place there. Okay, so next up we've got our pilot's ejection seat, and we have this rod that goes onto the back. Now it does have this little funky T-slot and these little wings that are on it that kind of fit into that T-slot and slides down into the back of the seat. And it's a little fiddly, but there we go. So once it's in place, we just want to make sure that it's all the way down, because the gap above it is where the seat back, and as you can see, we got tabs on our seat back there. That's where they're going to sit. And we'll just press that into place and make sure that everything is assembled. And now all we need to do is touch a little bit of Tamiya Extra Thin to it. And I'm trying not to paint the thing with the glue. There we go. And that is our ejection seat. So that's together, and we can set that aside and let that set up for us. So this piece right here is what the nose gear mount actually sets into. And again, it is a T-slot. Very positive how it goes together. Just want to make sure that it's firmly pressed down into the T-slot, and then we'll just glue that one in. Now with that done, we have a slot and tab for the actual wheel well, which sits right between the pilot's knees. And you just got to set it right into place. And we will take our Tamiya Extra Thin and just dab it right onto it there. Now we do want to make sure that this piece is nice and square with the wheel well, because all this has got to sit inside the fuselage. So next up, we'll go ahead and put our control stick into place. And as you can see there, it is a half moon shape peg that goes into a half moon hole. That way we can't get it backwards. Otherwise, Hillbilly would have that backwards. So, next up, we're just going to make sure that it is nice and centered in a neutral position. Now, this is the bulkhead that our ejection seat sits to, or is affixed to, and it is a T-slot and tab just like that. Now, the direction says not to glue it, so we'll see how that works out. So I'm not going to glue it. We're going to leave it just like that. Alright, so we've got step 2 complete. On to step 3, which is our landing gear assemblies, our nose wheel, and of course we have our main gear as well. I just want to draw your attention right here. See where I've written in the colors of what these parts are supposed to be painted, and that's going to help us later on. That way we're assembling things that are of the same color, which will make it easier for painting. And first of all, we're going to go ahead and look at this front landing strut. I want to make sure that that fits correctly and make any adjustments that are necessary. That way we can actually leave that front landing strut out during our painting phase. So we're going to go ahead and do that, and then we're going to put all of our landing struts and stuff together. So that should be really interesting. So let's go ahead and get started with that. So first of all, let's take a look and make sure that we can actually insert this, our nose landing strut, and we'll be able to remove it, because I want to be able to paint this without that in the way, and so that shouldn't be a problem. So I think that's going to be fine. So going back to our instructions here, we're going to take a look now at this wheel bay for our main gear. These parts are vertical, these two bulkheads, so we probably want to go ahead and look at that, because when we go to put this together, we've got to have all of our cockpit components in. As you can see, these will set into those little areas on the left and right fuselage. There's also that T-piece for the wings, and there's our landing gear bay. where those parts are perpendicular to the main piece. And I just want to make sure that everything's going to fit together correctly when we go to put this together, because the name of the game here is test fit, and we want to make sure that we don't run into any real issues later on when we go to glue this thing up. So we're going to go ahead and concentrate now on our main landing gear bay, and these parts, they do fit kind of tight, which can be a good thing. It keeps the parts from falling off while we're doing our test fitting. We're just going to go ahead and stick this together. This is a dry fit, so we've got that together, and now we're going to take our fuselage halves, and this is that T-piece that goes in. Now our wings and our engine are actually going to mount on that piece, so we'll slide that in. Then we're going to put our front landing gear wheel well assembly in place, as well as our ejection seat bulkhead with our ejection seat already on it. And then we'll go ahead and stick our main landing gear bay into place. And all these parts get sandwiched together between the fuselage halves. So we'll take the fuselage and put it together, and we have to thread that T-piece through, and that T-piece will hold our wings. And we just align those little pins and things together and make small adjustments here. Since we don't have any glue holding anything together, you got to make some small adjustments. And we're looking for anything that's going to keep us from being able to assemble this kit correctly. Now, for Tamiya, that's not normally an issue, but on some other kits, it's always a good idea to check and make sure that everything fits well. Now we'll just take it back apart. So with that already checked out, we can go ahead and assemble our main struts here. So we do have this little linkage piece that needs to be glued on to our left and right main landing gears, and getting it situated correctly. I'm having trouble with my tweezers, so I think the best thing to do probably is just take and stick it on with my fingers. So I get it oriented correctly here, and we will just go ahead and stick it into place. I don't know why I even bother with the tweezers. Usually the parts just slip and slide and rotate around and causes me problems. But there we go. And that's where it needs to go. We have to do the other side as well. Now when it comes to attaching the large bulkhead to our main landing gear bay, it is a really tight fit and it doesn't really close up the gaps too good. So I'm just going to clean that up a little bit for us. That way it will seat. Now there's a center structure right there in the middle of the main section, and it needs to be seated all the way against it, and that gives us a nice square perpendicular fit. So we just want to make sure everything is seated correctly and before we commit to glue. So we'll go ahead and just glue that up once everything looks right. Now with that in place, I want to make sure that it is all the way seated, so I will press that together. It doesn't hurt to check your work. You just want to make sure that everything is the way you expect it to go together. So now we have our main landing gears, and it is there's a hole for it to go into and a slot for that long tab to go into, so you can't really get these wrong. Just make sure that they are pressed and fully seated, and this is going to help make sure that everything is nice and strong, and also that these landing gear struts are symmetrical with the actual airframe. Otherwise, our Me162 may set a little cockeyed. We don't want it to look like it needs extra maintenance while it's sitting on a tarmac. So we need to make sure that that's seated very well before we commit to glue. And always look at it and make sure that everything looks right before we glue them into place. So we do have this support structure here that's going to go in, and it is keyed, and it just sets down into a little slot, and it has a small tab to make sure it's center, and we'll just glue that in as well. And also you want to add a little glue where it's attached to the control arms for the landing gears. Now we have a center beam, I guess we're going to call it. Now this beam has two different size tabs, left and right, so you can't get that backwards. And then next up we have these support rods, and they are a little fiddly to get in there. We're going to start off with a short one here, and probably the best way to do this is to actually get it into that hole that it needs to go into in the horizontal piece of the landing gear bay. Yeah, like that. And then it attaches to that bulkhead. And so there's a small hole there for it to go into. Just want to make sure that we get everything seated correctly and pressed into place. So I probably could have drilled that out, but it'll go. There we go. It looks pretty good. So our second rod actually threads its way through a hole in that center support structure that we put in previously. And it is a little fiddly to get it in there. The best thing to do is kind of thread the needle and get it up in there, and with a little bit of finagling, you know, you can get it to go. This one's giving me a little bit of trouble, but as you can see here, once we get it seated, we can set the end of it into the bulkhead. There we go. Nice fit. It's a nice fit. And so now all we got to do is touch it with just a little bit of Tamiya Extra Thin on the back side of the holes where the parts go, and that will help glue everything together. Don't need a lot of glue here. I tend to use too much glue anyway, so I think we're in good shape here. Now we do have some sort of a downdraft pipe here. I'm not sure exactly, maybe it's a vent tube of some kind, but it does set kind of vertical, and then it has that connecting piece that is going to actually mate up to the outer skin of the wheel bay on the bottom of the aircraft. So we're just going to touch some glue there and try to get it pretty much into place. Now we don't want it shifted left or right, so we just need to align that up as best we can. And as you can see there, you take your tweezers and that looks pretty good. So that's our assembled wheel bay. Now all these parts are painted pretty much the same color, so that's not an issue there. The only other color that we're going to be using there will be the chrome for the struts themselves. Next up is we're going to put the rear section, the rear bulkhead, into place. Now back to our instructions. We've got some control panels that we need to put in along with a portion of our main armament in both the left and right side of the fuselage there in the cockpit area. And we just want to make sure that we get these pieces situated correctly and they are fully seated. So I'm just pressing them in with my thumbs to make sure, and as you can see that they fit so nice and tight that you don't have to worry about it falling out. And we'll just glue those into place. And for our main armament, it sits on a peg, and then it has a little locator pin that makes sure that the alignment is correct. We'll press that into place, and we'll just touch it up with a little bit of Tamiya extra thin to secure it. And these parts fit really, really good, so we don't have to worry about that, which you would expect from a Tamiya kit. And then again, we have to do the same thing on the opposite side of the fuselage in the cockpit area. And as you would expect, most of it fits very, very well, which is what we have come to expect from Tamiya kits. However, not every kit that you're going to want to build is going to be a Tamiya kit. There will be subjects out there that are made by other manufacturers that Tamiya just doesn't cover. I strongly recommend that you do plenty of fitting because your test fitting is going to make sure that everything works well and it all comes out correctly. With Tamiya, we don't usually have much of a fit issue, if any, but with other kits, sometimes you have to make adjustments, and on some kits, you have to make a lot of adjustments. So if you're new to modeling, please keep that in mind. That'll keep you from having a lot of heartache later on. Now that I've got this all fitted into the left-hand side of the fuselage, we're just going to touch that up with a little bit of glue. And that Tamiya extra thin will flow right around our parts and secure it for us. So that's really what we want, is to make sure everything is secure and ready for painting. So now it's time to go back to our instructions. And here you can see in step 6, Tamiya says that we actually need to relieve these little indentations here. We need to cut this away, and that's on the left and right side of the fuselage for our main landing gear bay, and that's if we're going to have our landing struts extended. So to make way for the hinge points for our landing, or our landing gear doors that are going to go into place there, I'm just going to use my hobby knife and trim away most of that, and then I'm going to come back with a file and clean that up. And we need to do all 4 of those little slots. That way our landing gear bay doors are going to fit correctly. And then I just come back and kind of scrape away that fuzz on the outside. Now some people like to use Tamiya extra thin and kind of melt that away. You can do it either way. I'm just going to kind of scrape it away a little bit and clean it up. And we do have, once we get this one done, we do have the other 3 to do. Just make sure that you stay within the molded slot that Tamiya has provided for us on the inside as a guide. So with our slots all cut out, on to the rest of part 6, which is addressing this T-piece here that has these pins that we're going to put in, and they have those caps as well that hold them securely into place. So here's that T-piece, and that's the steel pins or rivets. I think they call them rivets. It's a really tight fit, so we need to press those in, and then we need to make sure that they're fully seated. So I'm just going to use my tweezers here and press them completely into place. Now this is going to not only help hold our wings into place, but it also holds the engine assembly on top of the aircraft. So we need to make sure that we do everything we can, that this is a nice and solid connection point for it. So with those placed or pressed into place, there are these little caps that we need to glue over top of the bottoms of those pins that we put in. And so I'm going to use plenty of glue on it and let it set up. That way we don't have to worry about later on when we're installing the engine or changing it out that those push out of place. So I'm going back to test fitting again with everything glued up, and I think everything's square and everything's going to be right, but I just want to make sure that we don't have any issues when we go to assemble the fuselage with these internal parts. And as you can see here, if I can get the angle just right, with everything installed, when we squeeze the rear section of the fuselage, you can see that bulkhead kind of pops in just a little bit. So there is some movement there, meaning that there is a little bit more tension than what we want. So we need to address that, because that's going to cause a problem for us when we go to assemble the aircraft. And it may be something that I did wrong, I don't know, or maybe, well, I'm not sure, but we're going to fix it anyway. So what I've decided to do is I'm just going to relieve the back side of the rear bulkhead so that when we squeeze the fuselage together, it's not squeezing that rear bulkhead inward into the bay area. And once we have removed enough material there, we will go ahead and test fit it again and make sure that everything fits correctly. Just don't want to have any issues when we go to put this thing together. So with that done, we can move on to step 7. So the first thing we're going to address here is we have to cut our main landing gear bay doors apart from that center section. And that is molded as one piece, but Tamiya says that we need to go ahead and cut that. So as you can see here, we have the separation line here. And I'm just going to use a sharp craft knife. Now this is a number 11 X-Acto blade, in case you're wondering. And I'm going to really lightly scribe it right down the molded line. And that's going to be the separation line here for cutting these bay doors away from that center section there. And we're just going to keep traveling down that line at the same angle, and it's not that thick, so it should separate fairly easy for us. Just don't put a lot of pressure on it, because you don't want to have a mistake, you know, and you definitely don't want to slip and cut yourself. And you can see we're starting to come through on the back side, so just a little bit more and we'll be able to separate these pieces. Just be careful, cautious, and we don't want to scratch the exterior section there, which will cause us a problem later on when we go to paint it. We'll have to fix that. And it eventually will just cut completely through, as you can see there, and it separates fairly easy. So Tamiya did a good job in instructing us on how to do this, more or less. So that's going to look good. So what we need to do next is we need to clean up that cut a little bit, especially on the inside where we cut through. There's going to be a small burr where the polystyrene has been separated, and it'll be pushed inside. So I'm just going to scrape that down using my hobby knife, and that will clean that up for us. You can always sand it a little bit if you need to. Okay, so with our landing bay doors separated from that center section, it's time to do the other part of part 7, or step 7, which is the tail section. And as you can see here, I've already cut the parts loose from the sprue, and I'm checking the fit. So we're just going to add a little bit of Tamiya extra thin there to get them to stick into place. And we're just, oops, there we go. We just want to get these, they should be perpendicular to the surface of the horizontal stabilizer. They do angle in at the top, so we need a 90-degree angle right here at that mating surface. So the easiest thing to do is to take something square. I'm just using my steel rule here as a square to help square it up. And if you can see what I'm doing here, yeah. We're going to set it, and once we get the angle right and it tacks up for us, We just want to make sure that it's it's right, so it'll be symmetrical with the opposite side. We can add the other one, and we're in good shape. It looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. So on to the next step. So this is going to be step 8. And in step 8, we're going to assemble our wings. So these are our main wings, left and right, and each one is 2 pieces. So I'm going to put a generous amount of Tamiya extra thin on the locator points here to put the upper and lower sides of the, or sections I should say, of our wings together. And it's probably prudent that we go ahead and clamp those together. So what we'll do is we will put the clamps right over top of the area where the pins are. That'll help close up any gaps. And so I'm going to clamp it just like that. And the next thing we're going to do is we'll be running some Tamiya extra thin down the seams to make sure we got good contact areas there and everything is glued together for us. I tend to use a lot more glue than probably other people do. Now with our wings all glued up, we're going to go back to dry fitting again. And so we have our T-section along with our main landing gear bay just dry fitted together. And what we're checking here is this wing root area, which for a lot of aircraft models, this can be somewhat of an issue with that fit. And I'm just looking because I want to try to minimize as much of an issue as possible. So we're going to go ahead and fit our wings into place and check out what the fit's going to be, and I think it looks really good. We don't have a large gap. Everything fits nice and snug, and that is great. I mean, you can't ask for better. That fits nicely. So while we're at it, I think a good idea will be go ahead and let's fit that tail section as well and see if we have any issues there. Of course, it helps if you've got it oriented correctly. And we'll go ahead and stick that on just to check our fit and make sure that everything's going to go together with no great big gaps or any real issues. So we're in really good shape here, I think, with this kit. So here's our progress. This is what we've accomplished here in part 1. So now we're ready to actually spray some paint. So that will wrap up part 1. So we've got some assemblies put together so that we can paint the interior of the fuselage, our cockpit, seat, dash, or not dash, but instrument panel. Also our wheel wells. We need to get all that taken care of and painted up, and that'll be in the next video, which we hope to get those fuselage halves put together, and we can start working on, I guess the next thing will probably be the engine, and that ought to be pretty interesting. It's a pretty detailed engine setup. So for all you guys that are new, if you're not a subscriber, I hope in this video that I earned your subscription. And special thanks to all of my subscribers. It's because of you guys that I keep making these little videos, and I hope that you enjoyed this one. So until next time, guys, stay safe.